So today we will have a look at traffic from jasmine and olive trees, which is available for free in this VRAC, and it's also available in hardware if you are interested in a unique modulation source for your system. Let's listen to some sounds and start with the video. So let's start with the basic functions. Here I have Tremor 2 as a percussive voice. It's being sequenced by the gate sequencer from Impromptu. It will sound like this. Right, it's also going through a delay. For now the delay is all the way down. Now instead of having one sequence, I will split this sequence into three. So I will disconnect the first one. Right, and let's say that the second channel here will have hits 1 and 9, right? I'm just splitting this sequence. Then the next one will have, let's say, 4 and 15, and then the last one will have steps 11 and 12. And now on traffic, we have, as you can see, 3 trigger inputs. So I will send those 3 channels to the 3 trigger inputs, 1, 2, and 3, and then I can get the same rhythm, the combined triggers from the trigger sum output. So this I will use to trigger again Tremor 2. So again, this will be a combination of all 3 channels. So for now, again, it will sound the same. Right, and now on traffic, if I zoom in a bit, we have 3 channels. We have 3 CV channels, CVA, CVB, and CVC. Right, and I can use them now to modulate things on Tremor 2. With each trigger, a different combination of values will be chosen. So let me show you. For example, CVA, we can use to modulate the decay of the bass drum here. Right, and let's say that whenever trigger A is being chosen, it will have this amount. Right, whenever trigger B, it will be closed. Or trigger 2, and trigger 3 will have much longer decay. Right, the second set of CVs will go and modulate the shape. Right, so let's say that for the first one, we will have a bit, but for the trigger 3, whenever it's chosen, it will have full shape. Right, so again, now we have more variation. CVC will go to the decay of the noise section. Right, and let's say in this case, only when trigger 2 is chosen or active, we will get a bit more decay. Right, so now for each group of hits, right, we have here 2 hits with one settings or one set of settings, another group with a different set of settings, decay, shape, and decay of the noise in this case, and another group with a different combination of settings. Again, we have 3 channels, 3 trigger inputs. Each trigger will switch between a combination of values, basically. Right, I will bring in the delay now. Very nice. Right, so you can hear the variation as a sort of a preset switcher, if you will. Right, so it will switch between 3 different presets. Okay, let me mute this for a second. I have another example. This can work really well also with polymeters. Right, so here I have the 8-step trigger sequencer from Count Modular, and I have 3 sequencers set or sequences. Right, each has a different length, one with 8 steps, one with 7 steps, one with 5 steps, so they will meet each other at different times. Right, this will trigger kick-off from the fuck-off or with a lovely change. There is some chorus, some distortion. All of the patches will be available for you to download if you want to take a closer look. So this will be the first sequence, right, with 8 steps. This will be the second one. And again, they will meet each other at different times. And this will be the third, creating a sort of a macro rhythm, if you will. And again, I'm using the trigger sum output to trigger the voice with all three sequences combined. Right, so now I can use them to modulate different things, so I can use each trigger to have a different preset. For example, CVA will go to the decay of kickall. Right, so when CVA, or when trigger 1, will be active, this combination will go out of the CV outputs. Right, CVB will go to the shape, and CVC will go to the filter. Right, so again, we have a sort of a preset switcher, a switch with 3 inputs and 3 outputs that will switch between different set or a different combination of values. I'm going to bring the kick back in here because it's nice, and I'm going to use the kick also to sidechain this bass. Now I'm going to use here on Tremor 2, we have the envelope output. If you want a quick tip video about this, let me know. I will do my best, but basically I can use this to duck other voices. Right, I have here also a hi-hat, white noise going to a bandpass filter, some modulation. This can work also great for pitch to sequence different notes. Here I have Opolus from Volt as an FM voice. And here on Traffic, as you can see, I'm using the first row through a quantizer as pitch information. So I have 3 different notes set, and according to the triggers, in this case, they are coming from this module from Vox Glitch. So according to these triggers, the 3 notes will switch and it will sound like this. Right, I have here another example. In this case, I'm using 2 outputs for pitch for 2 different oscillators. So all in all, we have 6 notes. And I'm cross-fading between the oscillators. So we get once the first one. Sometimes we get the second oscillator, the second combination of notes. Again, all of the patches are available for you to download if you want to take a closer look. But for now, this will sound like this. So Traffic has 3 modes. Until now we used the bass mode. Let's explore something else now. Here I have the macro oscillator 2, or Platts, for mutable instruments. This is probably the best case used with Traffic, since you can switch between 3 different sounds. Right, we have the model input as CV input here on Platts. And I'm using, in this case, CVA to control it, right? So with each trigger, we get a different sound. It will sound like this. Right, as you can see. Now let's explore the random mode. Each time we select the random mode, the values will be sent to random channels A, B, or C, but this will loop each and every time, so we can continue exploring and experimenting and find the loop that we like. Right, so now it's again on bass. If I set this to random, right, you can see we have a different loop selected. I can do this again. Right, and now each one of the values here that we selected will be sent to, or randomly will be sent to, different channels. And this is a nice loop. By the way, I'm using here another module from Vox Glitch. This is the glitch sequencer to trigger the 3 channels. Right, so again, also in hardware, you can continue switching this to the random mode and get all sorts of results. In this case, I'm using the auxiliary output of Platts to create a sort of a glitchy sound together with the modulated Chronoblock 2. Just to add another glitchy layer to everything. And I have here another example, in this case with Pellet, which is a Platts clone. It's a clone of a clone, I guess. And also here I'm using traffic to switch between different sounds. I'm using the sec3 to trigger the 3 channels. Just because it says trigger doesn't mean you have to use a trigger signal. I'm using here actual CV, as you can see from the sequencer. Right, I'm sequencing the pitch as well. Let me solo this actually for a second. Right, and again I have the 3 triggers switching, or the 3 upper triggers here switching between the different modes. And again, if I go to random, we get different results. This is nice. Right, so like this you can experiment and find different loops. Let me undo this and add also the delay that I have here. Right, and here I have another example, and this is unfortunately something we can only do in VCVRAC. I have here Tremor FM, and here what I'm doing here is I'm switching, or I have the mode switch here mapped with micromap from Sternmelder, right, which means that I can use something like a sequencer, like the ADDR sequencer, to basically sequence the switch. As you can see, it's moving here by itself, and again, this we can only do in VCVRAC. If I solo this voice, right, we will always get one cycle here with the bass mode, so it will always be the same. And then it will just continue switching to the random mode, and we will get different combination of values. So there's another mode, the groove mode, that will affect channel 3 only. So here I have a clock, just 16th notes triggering the third trigger here, and this is sequencing again plats. Right, so for now it's set to bass mode, so there is no change. But when I switch this to groove, channel 3 will be again randomized, but it will again continue looping, and it will just take different values from the different knobs here. Right, so if I change this to groove, right, as you can hear, we get a longer sequence, and again it will be randomized. So if I do this a few more times, I can find a nice loop. Right, something like this. So again, we get a longer sequence, which will affect only channel 3, and each time we will get a different loop. Okay, so again, this will not affect channels 1 and 2, so you can use this mode to experiment with channel 3 only, while keeping the 2 channels unaltered. So here I have 2 more sequences that I can use to trigger 1 and 2. Right, and then select between different values here. This is probably a good time to mention that channel 1 and 2 have higher priority, so when multiple triggers happen at the same time, just like now, there is still variation. Again, if you remember, I'm using just a steady clock that will always trigger 3. But still, channel 2 has priority over channel 3, and channel 1 or trigger 1 has priority over trigger 2, so there is still variation. I have here another example. Right, so first of all, I'm using channel 3, I'm using this groove mode to change the pitch, so we have longer pitch variation. Right, if I solo this for a second. Right, instead of having just 3 notes like we've seen before, we have here now a longer sequence with the groove mode. And another thing I have here, I have on the sequencer itself, I have the first triggers with probability, so there is even more variation. Again, trigger 1 has priority over 2 and 3, so when this happens according to probability, we get more variation. Here I have Tremor 2 as another voice with a nice chorus, some distortion, a phaser. I'm using Topograph, which is another clone for Mutable Instruments, a sequencer. It has 3 trigger outputs that I'm using to trigger traffic, and this will sequence tremor 2. Now, the hardware version has a few extra options that for now are not available in VCV, like the alternative firmware water and the deep switch settings. Can be that these will be added in the future, it can be that by the time you watch this video they were already added, but in any case, if you're interested in the hardware version, I highly recommend going over the manual to see exactly what the hardware version can do. Now, it's also possible to chain multiple modules in hardware, and in VCV it's even easier since you can use as many as you want. Basically, when chained in hardware, it will send the same triggers to the chained module. So in VCV, we can just connect them manually. I have here one traffic. This is again sequencing key call from Befaco. Right, and here I have another traffic set to control different parameters, and I can just connect the same triggers and have them sort of chained, I guess. So now I have 6 CV outputs instead of just 3. Right, and again in VCV we can have as many as we want. Here I have 5 traffic modules controlling all sorts of things here on Terraform, also generating pitch information. Right, it will sound like this. Another fun thing to try is using one of the outputs of traffic to modulate the clock that's running it. Here I have a sequence with Platts, again macro oscillator 2, and an LFO as my clock. It will sound like this, of course with some distortion. Right, but now I can use, for example, CVC to go back and modulate the LFO via the FM input, right, to create something a bit more wonky. Right, something like this. Here I have another sequencer that's running with the same LFO, so again it's also kind of wonky. Now in VCV-Rack, as you've seen throughout the video, there are so many different sequencers you can use that can generate multiple trigger sources. Also in hardware there are quite a few, but let's say that you either don't have one or you want to experiment with various ideas. Here, for example, I have a 7-step sequence with a sequencer here from JW, again sequencing Platts. Right, and let's say that I want to use traffic with 3 different triggers. So one thing I can try is using a clock divider and divide the sequence itself. So I'm going to use the gate output from the sequencer to clock the clock divider, and now I can use, for example, a division of 3, a division of 5, and a division of 7. Right, and now I have 3 triggers that I can use to trigger traffic and create again sorts of presets or switching between different values. Right, let me mute this for a second. I have here another example. So something like branches, for example, or one of its clones can work great as a flip-flop, and with a flip-flop you can divide sequences. If you're interested in more techniques and ideas, I have a document full of them with patch diagrams and everything. There's a link in the description if you are interested. But now I have here a sequence with slips and Terraform. It will sound like this. Right, and again I want to use traffic with 3 different triggers. So I will use branches here, or the Bernoulli gate and VCV-Rack, as a flip-flop to split this sequence into 3. So first of all, what I have to do, I have to switch the mode here from latch to toggle. In VCV you can do this in the right-click menu. In hardware you just have to click this button, take the knobs all the way to the right, and now the outputs will alternate and we will have a sort of a flip-flop behavior. So if I use the gates from the sequencer, output A will go to the first trigger of traffic, output B will go down to the second section here, and then we have A and B, and we have 3 triggers that we can use with traffic, even though we have just one gate output from the sequencer. Right, and that was it. I know this was a long video, but you made it to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Cheers.